Imagine trying to download the entire internet, like every single video, every article, every piece of data ever created, onto a dusty 1 GB thumb drive you just found at the bottom of your desk drawer. It's physically impossible, right? The
Sure.
hardware simply cannot hold the software.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to explore a mind-bending theory that suggests our entire physical universe is essentially that tiny thumb drive. And what it's trying to contain is something far beyond its physical capacity.
It is a really profound concept. We're taking a journey that starts in the very relatable, grounded reality of a corporate office, moves through the daily habits that shape our minds, and ultimately rockets out into modern information theory and the physical limits of the cosmos.
Yeah, and our map for this journey is a really fascinating source text. We are looking at a morning prayer sermon delivered by Joseph Bae to the 55th class of the Jesus Academia. It was originally given in Korean. And it's this incredibly rich synthesis of deep theology, intense personal testimony, and surprisingly enough, high-level astrophysics.
Right. It's rare to see those domains mix so thoroughly.
Exactly. We're going to see how deeply held spiritual convictions actually translate into highly practical courage at work, and how ancient scripture surprisingly locks step with the cutting edge of modern physics. Okay, let's unpack this. To kick things off, let's start where Bae starts, with Monday morning.
Right. So he opens with this concept of mimesis, which is the imitation of Christ. He poses a very practical dilemma. His audience is at this Jesus Academia retreat, which he describes as a heavenly time on a mountaintop. You know, you're surrounded by great teachings and amazing fellowship, but the retreat always ends.
Yeah, Monday always comes.
Yeah.
What happens when you have to walk back into the fluorescent lighting of your office? How do you maintain that profound spiritual connection when you're just, trying to get through a Tuesday morning staff meeting?
And he focuses on one very specific friction point for this, the public proclamation of faith, specifically regarding the name of Jesus.
But what completely blew my mind here is how the friction point completely flips depending on what country you happen to be working in. Geography completely dictates the challenge.
What's fascinating here is that Bae has this highly global perspective. He's worked in corporate environments in Korea, the UK, and the US. He observes that there's a universal opportunity to stand up for your faith, but the cultural mechanism is entirely different. Let's look at his experience in Korea first, which revolves around a very unique expectation, the expectation that Christians are teetotalers.
Right, they don't drink at all. And this isn't just some random preference. There's a deeply ingrained historical reason for this in Korean culture, isn't there?
There really is. When Western missionaries first arrived in historical Korea, which was known as Hyosesom, they encountered a society in profound distress. Bae actually describes it as hellish Joseon.
Oh, wow, that's intense.
Yeah, it was plagued by severe social disorder, massive gambling problems, prostitution, and rampant destructive drinking. So to combat this and create a distinct, healthy community, the missionaries instituted a strict boundary. To join the church, you had to completely abandon those three vices.
That makes total sense. It was basically a cultural survival mechanism.
Precisely. And over the decades, that historical necessity hardened into an overarching cultural norm. Bae points out that while the Bible itself doesn't explicitly mandate total abstinence from alcohol, Korean believers lean on the love principle found in Romans 14. They refrain from drinking out of respect for the wider community's conscience and, the historical weight of that boundary.
So take that historical baggage and drop it into a modern company dinner at Samsung SDI's Central Research Institute. If you know anything about Korean corporate culture, these dinners are a massive deal.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about bonding and hierarchy.
Right. And the head of HR is personally handing out drinks to all the new employees. And Bae, adhering to his convictions, is the absolute only person in the room who refuses the drink.
Which is an incredible social risk. In that environment, refusing a drink from a superior is often seen as a direct rejection of their leadership and the team's unity.
The HR head is visibly upset. But the twist is what happens the next day. The head of HR actually seeks Bae out and apologizes to him.
Yeah, he had looked into Bae's file, discovered he was the son of a missionary and a pastor, and he respected the fact that Bae held his ground.
But then Bae transfers to the UK and the US, and the entire script gets flipped.
Right, because in Western corporate culture, no one cares what is in your glass. Drinking is seen as a purely personal choice, but Bae encounters a totally different and to him far more abrasive friction point, which is the casual use of the name Jesus Christ as a workplace curse word.
He writes about feeling this deep, visceral anger when he hears it, And instead of just accepting it as, like, a quirk of modern Western vernacular, he decides to do something about it. Over the course of 10 years, he quietly and privately approaches over 10 different colleagues.
He pulls them aside and essentially says, "Would you mind not using that language in front of me? It's deeply offensive to my faith. How would you feel if I casually used your mother's name as a curse word when I was frustrated?"
It's such a brilliant way to frame it because it instantly translates a religious boundary into a universal concept of interpersonal respect. And the response he gets is overwhelmingly positive. Most of his peers immediately apologize.
And if they slip up later out of habit, they actively catch themselves and apologize again.
It's like he's handing out his own personal terms of service for interpersonal respect. You download an app, you agree to the terms to use it. Bae is politely but firmly establishing the terms of engagement for working with him.
That's a great way to put it.
But I have to ask the obvious question here. It's one thing to correct a peer who sits in the cubicle next to you. It's entirely another to correct the person who controls your paycheck. How does someone even muster the nerve to pull their big boss into a meeting room to correct their language without fear of getting fired?
That is the ultimate test of this conviction, and it leads to the climax of this part of his testimony. Bae finds himself in a tense situation with his big boss, meaning his line manager's line manager. This boss is furious about some work issue, his face is red, and he loudly drops the curse word 3 times in front of the entire department.
Oof, that is terrifying.
Bae admits to his audience that he froze. He hesitated. He thought about using the classic excuse of, well, I need to pray about this first, but he realized that was just a spiritualist excuse for cowardice.
So he physically stands up, walks over to the big boss, and quietly explains his stance. And this is the part I couldn't believe. Before Bae can even finish his explanation, this furious executive is profusely apologizing.
Yeah. He is totally disarmed by the quiet courage, and from that day forward, he actually treats Bae with a special level of professional favor. Later in his career, another department head does the exact same thing. Bae pulls him into a meeting room, explains his terms of service, and this new executive goes so far as to send a formal warning email to the entire department not to use that language.
If you look at the mechanics of what's happening here, Bae isn't just sharing a nice story about office etiquette. He's demonstrating a profound psychological truth. Polite, unyielding internal conviction has the power to physically alter the culture of a secular space.
It really does. But that begs the question, where does a person get the internal fortitude to pull their boss's boss into a meeting room? That kind of bravery doesn't just spontaneously generate.
Right. You don't just wake up one day and decide to do that.
No, it's cultivated. And this is where Bae pulls back the curtain on the intense, highly disciplined spiritual practices that fuel that courage. He introduces his second major theme, which is early morning prayer. This is a discipline his father instilled in him when he was just in the 5th grade living in the UK. Every single day at 6 a.m., his father would wake him and his sibling up to pray and read through the Bible using the M'Cheyne reading plan.
And for anyone who isn't familiar with that, M'Cheyne plan isn't just casually reading a verse a day. It's a rigorous, structured system developed in the 19th century where you read 4 different chapters from 4 different parts of the Bible every single day.
It's a huge undertaking.
Yeah, the idea is to synthesize the entire overarching narrative of the text over the course of a year. It's a serious, intellectual, and spiritual workout.
Exactly. And at first, as a 5th grader, Bae admits he was just dozing off. But over time, the discipline ignited something within him. He developed this intense, almost competitive spiritual drive. He talks about literally praying, "Lord, let me be the best at prayer in this world."
I love that. It's such a raw, wonderfully ambitious way for a kid to approach spirituality. Like, I want to be the gold medalist in prayer.
And that intensity scales up as he becomes an adult. He recounts being on a prayer mission in the UK in 2017, and he was meditating on Isaiah 40, the famous passage about those who wait on the Lord, renewing their strength and mounting up with wings like eagles.
Oh yeah, that's a beautiful verse.
He realized his spiritual life felt weak, so he prayed, "Please help me pray with the strength of an eagle's wings." Right now, my prayers are like the shallow, flapping wings of a pigeon.
The visual of the pigeon wings versus the eagle wings is so incredibly relatable. But he doesn't just rely on the emotional high of prayer, right? He anchors it with brute force memorization. And here is where he introduces an idea that really made me pause. He talks about the ROI, the return on investment of scripture memorization.
To illustrate this, he shares a story from when he first moved to the UK in that 5th grade year. He didn't speak a word of English. He was struggling, frustrated, and begging his parents to let him go back to Korea. His father, recognizing he needed a massive motivational lever, offered him a deal.
Okay, let me guess. Bribery.
Basically, if Bae could memorize Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, the entire Sermon on the Mount in the English NIV translation, his father would buy him his ultimate dream toy.
The Lego Technic 8880 supercar. We looked this up, by the way. Adjusting for inflation, this is essentially a $500 piece of highly complex plastic engineering. It is the absolute holy grail for a kid. So you have a child who does not understand English grammar, structurally memorizing 3 dense chapters of a foreign language in 5 months, purely driven by the promise of a Lego car.
And the result is that he recites it perfectly in front of an English-speaking church, and the psychological victory completely shatters his fear of the language. His confidence skyrockets.
He brings that same methodology into his adult life, too. During the recent pandemic, he spent the lockdown memorizing all 176 verses of Psalm 119 with his 6-year-old son. And he makes a very bold declarative claim here. He says there is absolutely no other spiritual activity that yields a greater return on invested time than memorizing Scripture.
Right. He gives a specific professional example. He talks about memorizing the mem section of Psalm 119, verses 97 through 104. He claims that the intense focus required to internalize that specific block of text yielded a double portion of wisdom that allowed him to instantly solve a highly complex technical problem at his secular corporate job.
An insight he insists he never would have reached through his own normal cognitive baseline.
He's arguing for a literal cognitive upgrade as a direct return on the time invested in the text.
But see, I have to push back on the terminology he uses here. Using a highly corporate term like ROI, return on investment, to describe an ancient spiritual practice feels incredibly transactional. Does framing it as a return on investment diminish the spiritual value? It sounds like putting spiritual coins into a vending machine to get a promotion or a Lego set.
It's a totally fair critique. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, Bae actually anticipates this, and he resolves the tension with a brilliant analogy about the nature of design. He argues that prayer, fasting, and memorization are not rote mechanical transactions. They're mechanisms for empathy. They're how we connect with the mind of a creator. He compares it to his love for Nintendo and Apple.
Yes. When he plays a perfectly designed Mario game, he isn't just having fun. He feels a tangible connection to the thoughtful care, the humor, and the genius of Nintendo's developers. And when he uses an iPhone, the seamlessness of the interface allows him to connect with the meticulous care of Apple's engineers.
Precisely. The ROI isn't the Lego set or the solved corporate problem. The true return on investment is the deepening of the relationship and the joy of connecting with the mind of the architect. Practices like his annual 21-day start-of-year fast aren't about punishing the body to get a reward. They're about temporarily turning down the volume of physical needs to tune into the frequency of the designer.
Okay, so if these intense internal practices are how we connect to the architect, it forces you to look up and ask, what kind of universe did this architect actually build? This transitions us from the internal landscape of the human mind to the macro, external reality of astrophysics.
Bae points his audience toward the fine-tuning of the universe. This is the scientific observation that the physical parameters of our reality are calibrated on a razor's edge. If you tweak certain fundamental forces by even a fraction of a percent, the universe collapses, or stars never ignite, and life is completely impossible.
He gives some really visceral examples of this architectural protection. Take the Earth's iron core. It's this massive sphere of molten metal 3,400 kilometers in radius spinning beneath our feet. And because it spins, it generates a magnetic force field around the planet. Without that invisible shield, solar wind would literally strip away our atmosphere.
We would just be a dead, irradiated rock like Mars. Or look at Jupiter, sitting roughly 778 million kilometers away. Because it's so massive, its gravity acts like a cosmic vacuum cleaner, sucking up or deflecting extinction-level comets that would otherwise be on a collision course with Earth.
It's like a cosmic bodyguard.
And Bae loves the linguistic fingerprints on this concept. He points out that in Chinese, the two characters that make up the word for universe, yuzu, both independently translate to the concepts of house or home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which perfectly aligns with the biblical claim in Hebrews 3.4, which states that every house is built by someone. The cosmos isn't a random expanse of empty danger. It's a meticulously fortified home.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
You have Jupiter acting as functional utilitarian protection, but then you have the dynamic between the sun and the moon. The sun's diameter is roughly 401 times larger than the moon's. But simultaneously, the distance from the Earth to the sun is also roughly 400 times greater than the distance to the moon.
And because planetary orbits are elliptical, not perfect circles, that distance ratio fluctuates slightly, from about 362 to 1 up to 419 to 1.
Right. And because those size and distance ratios overlap so perfectly in the sky from our vantage point, we get to witness visually stunning total solar eclipses. The moon exactly covers the disk of the sun, leaving just the glowing corona. Bae calls this a purely aesthetic touch. It isn't strictly necessary to keep us alive the way a magnetic field is.
That's a great distinction.
It poses such a cool philosophical question. Does the existence of beauty for beauty's sake in the cosmos provide a different kind of evidence than mere functional survival mechanics? It's the difference between an architect giving you a sturdy roof and an architect giving you a breathtaking stained glass window.
It implies a designer who doesn't just value biological survival, but deeply values the human experience of awe. But, if you want to talk about awe in terms of pure, staggering mathematics, Bae brings up the most notorious fine-tuning problem in modern physics, the cosmological constant, often referred to as lambda, or vacuum energy.
Let's slow down and really unpack what this is, because it is totally mind-bending. Vacuum energy is the baseline energy that exists in empty space. Even if you remove every atom, every particle, and every photon from a box, the empty vacuum still has a hum of energy in it.
Exactly. And when theoretical physicists use the equations of quantum mechanics to calculate how much energy should be in that vacuum, the math predicts a massive, roaring ocean of energy. But when astrophysicists actually look at the universe and measure it, they find an incredibly quiet, infinitesimally small whisper of energy. The mathematical prediction and the actual reality are off by a factor of 10 to the 120th power.
10 to the power of 120. That is a 1 followed by 120 zeros. To put that in perspective, scientists estimate there are only about 10 to the 80th power atoms in the entire observable universe. 10 to the 120th is an almost absurd number.
It has famously been called the worst theoretical prediction in the history of physics, but the implication of that tiny observed number is what actually matters. If the vacuum energy of our universe were even slightly larger, if it matched what the math says it should be, that energy would act as a repulsive force.
Right, pushing everything apart.
Yeah. The universe would have expanded so rapidly and so violently after the Big Bang that galaxies, stars, and planets would never have had the time to clump together and form. It would just be a cold, sterile void of rapidly dispersing dust. The margin of error for our existence is virtually zero.
Now, I want to pause here and be very clear with you, the listener, about what we are doing in this deep dive. We are impartially reporting Bae's views without taking sides, because Bae isn't just passively sharing these science facts. He uses this extreme fine-tuning to take a highly provocative, unapologetic stance against atheism.
He really does. He essentially flips the script on the burden of proof. He argues that to look at a 10 to the 120th power coincidence and say it's an accident requires an immense amount of blind faith. He claims atheists actually believe in 4 what he calls non-observable miracles.
Getting something from nothing, getting life from non-life, getting order from chaos, and getting consciousness from dead matter.
He is incredibly aggressive in his rhetorical style here. He openly mocks the multiverse theory, which is the idea that there are infinite universes bubbling into existence, which would statistically guarantee that one perfectly tuned universe like ours would eventually pop up. He jokes that a committed atheist would rather believe in an infinite array of invisible universes, including one made entirely of goat cheese.
Goat cheese.
Yeah, goat cheese, rather than admit the existence of a creator. He even suggests his audience should look atheists in the eye and ask 2 blunt questions. Why do you hate God so much? And who hurt you so bad?
Regardless of where you fall on the theological spectrum, you have to admit it's a fiercely confident way to wield astrophysics in a sermon. But all of this physical fine-tuning is actually just the runway for his final and by far his most profound point. He takes this massive, finely tuned physical universe, and he runs it headfirst into the limits of modern information theory.
This is where the synthesis of the sermon reaches its absolute peak. To understand it, we have to look back at 1948. An American mathematician named Claude Shannon published a landmark paper called A Mathematical Theory of Communication.
This is the paper that essentially birthed the digital age. Shannon was trying to figure out how to perfectly transmit messages over noisy phone lines. To do it, he had to figure out how to quantify information itself. He realized information wasn't just an abstract concept. It could be broken down into numerical binary states, yes or no, true or false. And he called that fundamental unit of data a bit.
But over the decades, theoretical physicists began to realize that Shannon's bit wasn't just about computer code. It was a fundamental property of physical reality. Everything in the universe, every atom, every photon contains information about its state. And this leads to a massive realization. The physical universe has a strict mathematical limit on how much information it can hold.
And the clearest example of this limit comes from the study of black holes. For a long time, scientists wondered what happens to the information of a star when it collapses into a black hole. And through what is called the Bekenstein bound, they discovered something totally counterintuitive.
Right. Normally, if you want to store more paper files, you buy a filing cabinet with a larger volume inside. But physicists discovered that the amount of information a black hole can store is not determined by its 3D volume, but strictly by its 2D surface area, the event horizon.
It's like finding out that the only way to store books in a library is by pasting the pages onto the exterior bricks of the building. Once the outside walls are covered, the library is entirely full, no matter how cavernous the inside of the building actually is. And if that rule applies to black holes, it applies to the universe itself. The cosmos, as incomprehensibly huge as it is, has a maximum data capacity. It is a finite hard drive.
Exactly. And this is where Bae connects this cutting-edge physics to the Gospel of John. Everyone knows John 1.1, in the beginning was the Word. But Bae points out that the true mind-bender is the very last verse of the book, John 21.25.
John writes, and there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself cannot contain the books that would be written.
Now pair that with Colossians 1.16-17, which states that all things in the universe were created through Christ, and in him all things consist or hold together.
Bae is arguing that John was not using poetic hyperbole when he wrote that verse. He was stating a literal mathematical reality centuries before Claude Shannon was even born.
This raises an important question. Information theory provides a literal scientific framework for John's poetic hyperbole. The information required to fully describe the infinite power, the nuance, and the cosmic love of the Creator literally exceeds the maximum information capacity the physical universe is capable of holding.
It goes right back to the thumb drive analogy we started with. It's like trying to download a petabyte-sized file onto an old 1 gigabyte thumb drive. The hardware of the universe simply cannot hold the software of the divine. You cannot fit the infinite data of God into the finite storage space of the physical cosmos.
Bae concludes by quoting a gorgeous hymn written in 1917 by F.M. Lehman. The lyrics go, "Could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the skies of parchment made, to write the love of God above would drain the ocean dry, nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky."
An ocean of ink running dry, a sky made of parchment running out of space. It is information theory, written as poetry, capturing the essence of a creator whose nature transcends the very physical parameters of the home he built.
What an incredible arc. We started with the deeply relatable everyday struggle of maintaining personal boundaries and politely asking a manager to watch their language.
Yeah, and then we explored the surprising cognitive and professional benefits of intensely memorizing ancient texts. We zoomed out to marvel at a universe balanced on a 10 to the 120th power razor's edge. And we finally arrived at the stunning realization that the universe itself is fundamentally too small to contain the concept of divine love.
It's a powerful reminder that our smallest daily actions, whether it's setting a boundary or spending 10 minutes in morning prayer, are not isolated events. They are inextricably linked to the largest cosmic architectures.
Exactly. When you look at your own daily routines this week, think about the boundaries you set or what you choose to focus your deep attention on. These aren't just corporate survival strategies. They are ways of aligning yourself with a much larger reality. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over. If modern physics tells us that our universe has a strict mathematical limit on the information it can hold, and if concepts like infinite cosmic love exceed that physical capacity, what does that mean for the human mind? How is it that we, as finite biological creatures living completely inside this limited physical hardware, are somehow able to perceive, feel, and even discuss the infinite?